I just had a conversation with a more junior community builder recently, and they're excited about community. Their organization is excited about it.
Mhm.
But when they went and did their stakeholder conversations of all the different leaders within the community or within the company
Company.
who are trying to understand how to leverage community, all of them said what they wanted to get from the community. How can we make the community work for me and my organization? It's taking.
Yeah.
And that's natural. That's how business works. But what every leader needs to understand is that you only get to do that taking once you've done a bunch of giving. And that's a new motion, I think, for most organizations is this value exchange, this concept of we do a bunch of things with them and for them. And then once in a while, we can take things from them or ask for things from them. And they're happy to at that point because they've gotten a lot of value from being part of the community. But you have to start with value creation first.
Founded in 2017, StartWell is Toronto's independent hub for innovators to collaborate. Our podcasts relate perspectives from the world's most diverse urban population to reflect unique insights into global business, media, and culture. So, Josh, it's great to have you back at StartWell, although you're now here via video link as opposed to
Hey,
in
I'll,
person.
I'll take what I can get. I'm always happy to be with the StartWell team.
Nice, man. For our audience catching up with us, you've been here before in your previous capacity at Asana. Why don't you tell us a little bit about kind of what you used to do at Asana?
Yeah, so I'm a community-led growth leader. So at Asana, I built out our community program, which was designed to help our customers connect with us and with one another so that they could get more out of Asana, the product. And so the reason why I was at Startwell is as part of my work, my team and I would host a series of events called Asana on Tour. We would do these literally all around the world. And we found our Toronto home at Startwell, where we hosted events on a number of occasions. And it was always super fun. And I personally really miss Toronto. And I wish I could come back sometime soon, but we'll see, hopefully in the future. But
Yeah, we'll
building those events at Startwell was also really great.
we'll get you back at some point, I'm sure, for StartWell content.
There we go.
Um, but I think that was something that I must say, the experience of seeing you at work in your role and with your small team that you guys were doing amazing things with, I think is an amazing case study for this larger topic of community. We can talk about community within like as a means of, um, well, as a go-to-market function or something for SaaS companies, but I think it transcends SaaS, it transcends software, is something that all companies should consider now. Um, so let's peel back the onion on your lens on community, um, and maybe that starts by kind of trying to figure out when you started working in community. Anytime in your career, when did you first say community is something as a topic that your occupation involves?
I think if you talk to most community people, all of them will say the same thing. I stumbled into this because it's not like you can go to college for community building. That doesn't exist. And
Right.
so for me, I really started building community at my very first jobs out of college, where I recognized that people can do more when you do them together. And it's different than just a team where you're assigned to work together on a project. It's more so here's some like-minded people and how can I help us come together in a new or different way. And the first time this really showed up for me professionally was when I was doing professional organizing and productivity consulting work. And for people who do that kind of work, usually they're working on their own as solopreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
And for anyone who's been a solopreneur can probably relate, it's exceptionally lonely. You are your own boss, and you're the practitioner, and you're the person that takes out the trash, and you're the IT support, you're everything. And I found that there was an organization of people who do the same work that I did. And so I went to my first professional association meeting, and that's when I really first experienced what community could be, where you have people who otherwise would never meet, don't work together, but share a common experience or passion or purpose or thing that they do.
Right.
And I was really inspired by that and the feeling that gets created. And so for me, my professional journey to community really started in that professional association where I eventually became the president of the association.
Oh, okay.
And I really liked the operationalization of how do we build this community? How do we strategically plan for the member experience? How do we make sure everyone is getting value out of it? And from there, that led me into building communities at organizations. Like I did this at CBS News and at Evernote and Asana and others.
Mm.
And I really enjoy the person to person nature of community, where in business, especially in building business communities, the customer is often referred to as this entity. It's like this nameless, faceless
User, the
the
user.
user. I hate that term.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, it just implies that they're taking, but really the customer is the one that's giving. So I think of how most companies think of this nameless, faceless entity, and I like to be the one that's helping put a face where there wasn't one before,
Mhm.
and helping people inside the company understand when we're talking about the customer. I actually can give you a name of a real customer, and we can talk about what their real life experience is because I've met them,
Yeah,
spoken,
yeah.
and that I think is one of the greatest benefits of community is rehumanizing something that has become dehumanized.
It's interesting, right? That idea of like you find community as a network of solopreneurs and, come together and realize that's what's missing. But also, like, what era was this? Like, when did you become the president of this organization?
This was in the early 2000s,
Okay. And that
and
was and you were primarily working in software or
yeah,
okay.
I've always worked in or adjacent to the tech world, and when I started doing productivity consulting, professional organizing work, that was in the early 2000s after
Mhm.
the initial tech bust here in San Francisco.
Yep.
And I had to figure out, okay, this isn't working out right now. What else can I do? And that's what led me into productivity consulting and then thereby into our professional association.
Huh. It was a super interesting time because I remember this. Like, I moved to New York in 2004, post Twin Towers. Right, the city was weird, and I think the whole of America was kind of like weird at the time. And the tech ecosystem was doing two things at once, from what I recall. There was this like boom bust kind of excitement where I think like at least in Silicon Alley, I remember like the all the shops on Broadway and people that kind of were still hanging on to doing stuff in New York were feeling like um, the suits wouldn't buy their wares, so they need to figure out new positioning. And then there was like a micro rebirth of like torrenting at the time. That was like in New York, that was a big thing, and LimeWire was like hiring up and growing. And I remember taking trips to the Valley and seeing the whole different thing. And one of the people I know who used to cover this beat was Om Malik. Do you remember Ohm from
Yep.
GigaOM? And then
Yep.
TechCrunch, and then he's now at True. I guess he's a partner at True. And like this was one of the things I remember going to Ohm's office, and it was this buzz of activity. We're talking 2004, 2005 in San Fran, and the scene was hot with a lot of. I think it was a very experimental time in tech, right? Like people weren't necessarily packaging what they were building as SaaS. The nomenclature didn't quite exist.
That didn't exist at that time, not yet.
I think the only people talking about this at the time, I kept hearing from like then those like people in Boston, like I think it was Boston, right? No, maybe not. Jason Fried, Basecamp,
Hmm.
and I remember like they were talking about this idea of like the software freed of install and how like cloud or server based software was going to change the whole world, and productivity was about people coming together, and that mix of kind of like I think this rebirth of the post boom bust cycle coming into that hacker ethos of the early internet, and software now being liberated from installs and being able to connect people, users. That was like a new era for this whole idea of community developing online, but through the web, I think, right? Where maybe in the pre 2000 it was like IRC based chat.
Yeah, this is when we really start seeing the rise of dedicated platforms and tools for communities. Typically, at that point, however, communities, at least ones that were online, from companies were typically seen as primarily for support deflection.
Mm,
It wasn't really seen as, oh, this is a place for us to really connect people, to engage them. It was more like, okay, how do we scale support so we can have it cost less for us? Not that that isn't valuable, and it's still one of the valuable outcomes of building community, at least within the tech world.
right.
But it was a, I would say, a very uninspired beginning for what community could be. It was the most, what's the most basic thing we can get community to do? It's like, oh, support deflection. Great. Let's do that thing. It didn't capture what I would frame as like the community zeitgeist of what's possible,
Hmm.
all the ways that people want to and can engage. It didn't capture that. Not at the time, not yet.
So at that time, if you remember, what were your personal frustrations with this, and where did you want to see this stuff go?
I always think of things like from my perspective, selfishly, I want to be able to do whatever I want within a community. Like I don't want the community program to tell me what I can't or can't do in terms of how I engage with other members.
Right.
And so I think my frustration at the time was that the tooling just wasn't there yet to have a broad-based, comprehensive community engagement ecosystem, especially not one that helps power the go-to-market motion in the way that it can now.
Sure. Sure.
I mean, now we have this notion of community-led growth that wasn't even remotely an idea at the time when I first started working on community.
I think there was also this kind of like question in that period of, and it still exists. It still exists, and definitely in startups all over the world. The question of like enterprise emulation mode, and how like rapidly scale companies questioning what their culture looks like are typically, which establishes the relationships across the board with customers, with vendors, with anyone, with staff. Often cases come up against their like largest in segment competitor that might be an acquisition, potentially down the road or something, or acquirer. And they're saying, well, how can we be more like them so we can steal customers away and fly under the radar? Like we're not just two kids in a garage. We're legit. We have $25 million. Um, and so part of that is like, this risk mitigation question of like, okay, well, if we empower our community or if we enable our staff and our customers to be brand advocates, how do we control our messaging?
Yeah, and that's where we often see community referred to as the competitive moat. Like I've built the moat around my kingdom via I would frame it as the community as cannon fodder when the enemy is approaching. I think there is a world where a company empowers and engages its customers. They're so excited about the product and what it's delivering for them that they advocate for it and they become a really unassailable, impossible to replicate competitive advantage for sure.
Mm-hmm.
The flip side of that, which is often at odds with how most companies think, is that doing that takes time because you're building relationships and most relationships don't get built overnight. And so companies that want to have, if they want the competitive mode or they want the competitive advantage or they want the engaged customers who advocate on their behalf, what they also have to be ready for is have an appetite for time, which is usually not what most companies have. However, the smart companies that have really seen great success with community have invested early in building it out so that it scales alongside the growth of the company. And the ones that are less smart see what that company did and say, I want that community also. How do we turn it on?
Mm-hmm.
It's not quite that simple.
So on that note, it's something that I've been scratching my head about for decades, which was, I forget her name, but there's this deeply impassioned entrepreneur that founded Ning. Do you remember Ning?
I do.
So Ning being a SaaS product for community builders who want to build their own community. You don't need to do the software development, just use Ning.
Mhm.
And that was like very exciting for people who were supporting it in the early days as venture capitalists and others. And then it didn't quite go anywhere. And then, the rebirth of it is Mighty Networks,
That's right.
right? And that I've been watching that whole space for a long time because professionally with my studio that I ran for just over a decade called Design Guru here in Toronto that specialized, we had a whole methodology, by the way. And the methodology was emulated from the Project for Public Spaces in New York, which is an urban public space think tank. And the methodology was placemaking. So you take a mixture of observational analysis when assessing the community sensitivities around space and stickiness around space and feeling of ownership and emotion and all these things. And then you take so it's a mixture of observational analysis and then first person data and surveys. But there's a whole matrix with how that data meshes together to then provide insight into how to redesign and redevelop space and turn it into a place. And that transformation, of course, being where a space becomes a place because it means something to the people that use it, and they have a functional expectation as well as like emotive comfort level expectations of the experience of that place. Um, so yeah, I had moved to New York to digitize that methodology, and then brought it back to Toronto and had a studio that was all inbound for like over a decade.
Amazing.
Um, and I found it very interesting that, I thought of the world's largest public space as being, the World Wide Web. And of course, we've seen a couple of these cycles of commercialization. And the things that customers in the pre commercialized or in between the two troughs of commercialization, which is, I would say that like .com era, the 1999 kind of millennial crash, and then the next wave being social internet 2008 onwards, like Facebook Plus. That trough there was really interesting because a lot of organizations were saying, okay, cost. They were comparing digital space still to physical space and saying, if we typically roadshow our products and services, it's going to be very expensive. There's a lot of moving parts. We got to go to conferences. We got to wait for that conference to be held. Digital space could let us bring people together, and it was still thought of as an experiment. And I think when clients came to us to build solutions, we built private social networks that were internal at organizations, that were external for all sorts of different stakeholders. And they were all context sensitive solutions for each community that we were assessing and developing for. So really cool, like, geeky brainy work to do these things. And some of them are still around today. Like in your neck of the woods is a university called the California Institute of the Arts,
Yeah.
CalArts. So my team designed and developed CalArts' first CMS solution for that took 200 plus independent discrete websites and mashed them into a single database, um, with like all this robust permission control and planning. That was a 6 month just planning engagement on the front end of that engagement to look at who in the university needs to publish versus communicate, and how do those two things interrelate to support um, the means of educating people, And so this is before like web class tutorials and stuff were a hosted software solution. We were building that stuff into digital classrooms. It was all built on Drupal, open source software.
Hmm.
So super
It's
flexible
really
and
taking me back now.
right, right. Um, but that was a glorious era because I think it was like though some of the early SaaS social networks were coming out, or I would say like the Ning type thing, um, people weren't able to procure digital community. Like they didn't think of it as a product suite or as a functional expectation of digital interfaces. So we were able to experiment and build custom stuff. And then, so I've kept my eye on what we used to build all through today, and I see. I'd love your thoughts on this, but I see the uptake today in the marketing of these sorts of turnkey digital community platforms aimed at creator class, like aimed at independent yogis, health fitness trainers, and makeup beauty experts, all of these sorts of people about as being tools to monetize their community. Um,
Yeah, I've seen a huge rise in what I frame as persona-based communities because I think there's the creators, but then I think there's the people who just are personalities and do a thing, like the yogis, etc.
right,
These all have a place in the world of community building. I see a very distinct separation between that sort of persona-based community and a company-based community because at the end of the day, the persona-based community is really centered on the person, the creator, the independent practitioner, etc.
right.
The company-based community is really centered on the product, not the person.
Mm-hmm.
The similarities are still they're still there. It's really finding people who are like-minded who want to come together around the product or the person, whatever it may be,
Yeah,
and creating really engaging experiences for them. The My concern, if I'm being completely honest, is with the persona-based communities, the only way they're monetized really is when people pay for a subscription. And in the broader world, I think most of us hear about subscription fatigue all
yeah,
the time.
yeah,
I think in order for these persona based subscriptions to really have a place, there just has to be tremendous value that's created by being part of them. What that is and what it would look like, I frankly don't know. That's not the type of community that I personally specialize in.
Right.
But I think if you are a creator, if you're a persona, if you're a practitioner, the tools that are available to you now, we've never had anything like this before to make it really super easy, completely turnkey, as you said, to build out something for your own audience. That's truly unprecedented.
Right.
Then it becomes up to you as the leader of these communities to make sure that what you're creating has tremendous value to the people who are taking part in it, whether it's free or paid. You're still transacting with someone because you're asking of their time.
Yep.
You're asking them to spend time with you and your community and the other people in it. Everyone's time is super valuable. So I encourage everyone, whether you're building a persona based community or you're at a company, think about what would be worth it for you if you were someone who was thinking about participating. What would be worth it for people who are part of the network now? How can you make it more worth it for them? And I think that's a notion that's often missed by community builders in general is the time that we're asking of people to spend with us as part of these communities. I think oftentimes, especially in the world of building company communities, which is what I specialize in, it's like, well, it's free to participate. Like, yeah, but so what? Like, there's a lot of things that are free where I could choose to spend my time.
Right.
Why would I want to do it here instead of one of those other places? And really thinking about the value creation is probably the most important part of the job for a community builder.
And I think it's a huge responsibility, and you see it. I mean, you see it a little bit in YouTuber culture, where I think coming out of the pandemic, we saw this burnout videos being a trend, where like product reviewers, especially, they were going through a lot of content because product was coming out even faster, and then you see it like even now today with the AI stuff, where people who think that their responsibility for communicating the latest, greatest, cool thing with their community of audience of subscribers, and then whether or not they have a platform to bring those people from YouTube into to engage with them in different ways. uh that fatigue of the responsibility of like constantly, and I think this might be a thing here, constantly entertaining, and then that might be a kind of like a dysfunction. Like the purpose of a community builder is not necessarily to be the center of attention for 1,000 people or 1,000,000 people, but instead to enable those people to find solutions and interact with each other, and act as almost a facilitator more.
I think so. I think it's a combination of, I would frame it as edutainment.
Right.
No one's gonna come to your content if it's boring, so it needs to be at least a little bit entertaining or interesting or of value. But I think you hit the nail right in the head. The real value that we have to offer in presenting people with information is to make it useful, educational, informational, so that they can act on
Yeah.
it. And there is so much information available to all of us at any given moment for whatever it is that we want to know about. This is where I think community really has an edge because if you present information to people that's useful and valuable and you give them an opportunity to talk about it with other people who care about that same topic or are trying to understand it better, that's where you create a really self-reinforcing flywheel of people contributing, people talking, people learning, then people contributing, talking, and learning. And it goes on in perpetuity if you do it well. Doing it well is really hard. That's the challenge. And not everyone is a fantastic content creator. Not everyone is a great writer. Not everyone wants to be on video or whatever their channel of choice may be.
Sure.
And so figuring out for your audience what would be of value to them via what channel, what method of delivery, and can you be the person or can your team be the people who create that and create it well enough that people want to continue to come back to it.
So let's talk about more core to your expertise is the the company community, the company based community, and also the community based company. Maybe I'll flip it around.
Mhm.
So, how can companies, from your vantage, utilize the power of bringing stakeholders together? Whether it's customers alone or other participants in someone's business inputs, people inputs, um, and get them kind of engage with each other around the brand. And let's start with keeping that brand central, in the community before we talk about leveraging the strength of that.
Yeah, I think generally people come to brand based or company based communities for a couple of reasons. One is probably that they like the brand. They like whatever the brand represents, whether it's the product or the ethos or how they do what they do. So having a brand that's strong, frankly, really helps a lot. I've been super, super fortunate in my career, and I recognize that this is just a stroke of luck more than anything. But like when I was at Evernote, that this was a brand that was at the time globally loved, and people knew it, which made my life a lot easier as a community builder, and they wanted to talk about it, which really made my life easy.
Yeah.
At Asana, people in business recognize the brand, they see the value in it. If they use it, they tend to really like it. So these sorts of things, anchoring the brand at the center of the experience is really helpful if you have a brand that people like.
Hmm.
Side, there are lots of companies that people don't like the brand, and they may have a product or a service that you either have to use because it's like what your company offers as your productivity suite of choice, or it's been inflicted on you by some other decision maker at your company that you have to use this thing. Those companies have brands. How people feel about them might be a different story. And so you as a community leader need to understand the context of your brand and how it might show up in people's lives and how they feel about it. But once you do that, I think regardless of the type of brand you have always have an opportunity to create experiences for people that help them go deeper, help them
Right.
understand why things get developed or why there's a new product and how you might want to think about it using it in your world, or just have people in the community meet decision makers at the company. There's so many ways that you can involve community members, and one of the things that I think about is the community is it's just people, right? It's people talking to other people. And when you have that and when you center their experience around the value that they're getting from your brand, that shows up in your business in so many different ways. It shows up in the marketing conversations where people are advocating and talking about your brand on social media without you doing anything.
Hmm.
They're just doing it because they like it. It shows up in sales conversations because oftentimes, if you're at an enterprise company, for instance, you're talking with a decision maker, but that decision maker is being influenced by other people within the organization who've already heard of your brand or have used your product at a different company.
Yeah.
And later on down the cycle, when they're adopting your tool or trying to spread its use, having a champion on the team that really likes what you do, they're going to grease a lot of those wheels for you. And so a lot of the benefits from the company perspective and what they get from community are really horizontal across the entire customer's journey all the way through when they become super champions and start talking about your product to your product team to share insights into what's working and what isn't and talk about it at their own networking events. There's just a lot of goodness that gets created there, but it's not without work on the company's side to make those things happen. If you're lucky, you have a brand that people really love.
Hmm.
That's amazing. That's not mandatory for making community work. It helps a lot, but it's not the only thing that makes it work. What really makes it work is being strategic about what your organization is trying to learn from the community and what value you're trying to exchange with them. There's always a balance. Like with community members, it's like a piggy bank. You
Right.
put money into the piggy bank. In the community world, that means giving them access, giving them resources, talking to them, giving them tools. And then periodically you take money out of the piggy bank. So you want to buy something. If it's a piggy bank, you crack it open, you take some money out. In the business world with community, maybe you want to ask for customer stories. Maybe you want to run an advocacy campaign. So you have to create a lot of value for the community members in order to extract the value from it. I just had a conversation with a more junior community builder recently, and they're excited about community. Their organization is excited about it.
Hmm.
But when they went and did their stakeholder conversations of all the different leaders within the community or within the company
Company. Yeah.
who are trying to understand how to leverage community, all of them said what they wanted to get from the community. How can we make the community work for me and my organization? It's taking.
Yeah.
And that's natural. That's how business works. But what every leader needs to understand is that you only get to do that taking once you've done a bunch of giving. And that's a new motion, I think, for most organizations is this value exchange, this concept of we do a bunch of things with them and for them. And then once in a while, we can take things from them or ask for things from them. And they're happy to at that point because they've gotten a lot of value from being part of the community. But you have to start with value creation first.
Right. And I think it's interesting because I think there's cultural, of course, implications or cultural norms that are not necessarily beneficial that kind of form this sort of take mentality in corporate culture where, if everything is kind of tied to a balance sheet and tied to the bottom line. Um, Often cases, at least from day one, whether you're a bootstrap company and that's because you don't have the resources at your disposal to be able to afford the time to invest in relationships, or if you're a venture capital company and then you're growing and it's scale at all costs, in this, let's call it like what, pre 1 year ago mode, um, where you have to get to that next funding round, and to justify it, you're adding bodies and you're not taking the time to do the things that would make your company more sustainable, like develop the enterprise relationships for large, scale sales if you're B2B and that kind of thing. So people are always in time deficit, I feel like, in at work. And I totally agree with you that often cases, like I was just talking to someone last week about this. I have this bubbling kind of narrative in the back of my brain that one day will be a book, and it's all about um, kind of challenging secularism in a sense, and talking about how, like, in the back of people's brains there's this, like, all of these, a religious ideology that is generations old, passed down in the back of their head. And what is the all-seeing eye if it's not God? It's certainly like data and data analysis, powered by AI and surveillance systems and stuff like that. So whatever the politic around the all-seeing eye is, I think there's a consciousness of it that people have. And the question of, how you keep yourself, in check with what your personal moral guidelines or any other kind of systems of values that you hold to propel your momentum in life, becomes, I think, something that culture at companies is now only able to assess. So, like, in the kind of 1970s organization, you'd have this top-down hierarchy and various managerial strata to be able to set performance guidelines, KPIs and stuff for various teams. And the teams go out and they crush and they get rewards. And it's that constant, okay, we're moving forward together as a team because all the little micro teams are moving in the same direction. And the Rat King will be, beneficial, pass down the gold at the end of the year. But yeah, now in the more distributed architecture of companies, I think people are having to be more self-reliant. They're going to have to be more self-propelled. And with that becomes this quandary of, like, how do people find fulfillment through work in a way that is sustainable? Not everyone has the, let's say, the same outcomes of the owner of a company or the foundation team, especially if we're talking about startups.
Hmm.
So this question of, like, throwing away the career track and at the same time being present in the moment within your position to add value necessitates a reassessment of what time really is priced by. And if, and I think smart companies already, like a lot of our clients, we talk about this all the time, where they're setting time aside, whether it's a chunk of the week, or it's a chunk in everyone's day, or it's an indication of half of your time is to be invested in a way that's totally of your own direction. So setting performance by capacity, but also one's want for more, personally. And in that, I think there's a lot of opportunity for developing community within organization and then as a tool for the organization.
I
Sorry, that was
agree.
very long-winded.
No, I'm right there with you. I think there's a lot of opportunity for, well, it's like with all things community, it's like-minded people. I think finding the people who share these same values and ethos and recognizing that the the I wish it was still the case, but the clear career path and trajectory that once existed, I don't know anyone who still has. I mean, I work in tech, so maybe I'm a little biased, but that fundamentally just doesn't exist in my world anymore. All of us are essentially work mercenaries.
It's funny you use that phrase. I've been using that phrase a lot in the last couple of months.
Yeah, it's a I wouldn't even frame it as a sad state of affairs. It's just kind of how things are. And the truth is, it's weird because for anyone who's ever worked at a tech company, most companies kind of frame it as like we're a family until we're really not. And if you've gone through a couple of boom and bust cycles, you know what being a family looks like until it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And it behooves each of us to figure out, if I really need to look out for myself in my career, how can I navigate the ever changing landscape of today's world of work? How can I find like minded people along the way who can be my community as I move from place to place, because that's typically what work is going to look like for most of us at this
Right.
point.
Right.
And how do I make sure that I'm feeling connected both to the company that I'm at and giving it my 100% and recognizing that no jobs are forever anymore? And where can I build my professional and my social structure to help support me wherever I end up working? And that's, I think, one of the ways that community can come into play is by building these networks that are not tied solely to the place that you work, but to the professional that you are.
Right. Right. And professional development and mentorship can often cases not be driven within organization regardless. So one of the things that we've been advocating for here at Startwell is that our member companies, or companies I should say that are our customers really, um, you know, enable their teams to be able to go out and seek mentorship opportunities and seek these sorts of like, professional communities to engage in. And it's funny because that led to us hosting. So this year I've started hosting a number of like chapter organizations that are professional communities, to give them the structure, to give them the infrastructure of saying, okay, well, once a month I'll give you, a pro bono or in kind of venue to use to gather 100 people. We'll create content out of that. And of course, there's stuff to talk about with how those two connect, right? Content and community and marketing. Um, but leave it aside to just say, now I have these tentpole dates every month in the calendar that I could say to my customers, well, those three guys from your senior executive team would love to meet peers that they can soundboard stuff off. Bring them on Tuesday, bring them on Wednesday, send them over. Um, and that's been huge for all the people that we've engaged in that way.
That's amazing. And I mean, frankly, you're very fortunate that you have an amazing space to invite people into. That helps a lot.
Right, right,
And finding these communities that are professional associations, that are other networking groups that aren't tied to a specific company, even if it's sponsored by a company or a couple of companies, it lends to the community motion of we're creating value irrespective of the company that we're at.
right, right.
And I, as a person participating, can get value out of meeting other people, hearing from other organizations, hearing from leaders, learning and exchanging ideas, irrespective of where I happen to work. And I'm meeting other professionals in the same field or other fields than me that share the same ideas. It's incredibly helpful and super valuable.
We're finding that, of course, even for our client engagements, like a lot of companies are saying, okay, this is the big word for the year. Leave aside, people changing their plans because of politics and so on. A lot of companies are saying we need offsites. They've gone through that cycle, right? Of like pre-pandemic, everything was like full tilt forward. Then the pandemic was the pause. Then it was like remote work, then hybrid work. Then we need a mixture of physical space and non-physical, but we're suddenly a global company and we didn't plan on this. And we need to bring all the folks together to at least align in real life. And everyone's budgets are different, so some teams that come here once a year will do a full team urban retreat at Startwell, and then they'll go off to Mexico or something at another point of the year. And then other teams are like, might be a 200-person organization that does a full team session here, and then once a month they've got smaller teams, and once a week they've got like a 5 or 10-person teams that are here. So how people are learning to use space to support their own internal community at organizations is actually quite heartening, because it's exploratory. We're in a whole new phase of this, but it enables a new way of challenging, I guess, the hierarchies that are implicit in like everyone being in one space every day.
It
People
evens
have
the playing field.
it does. People have privacy when they need it for their own conversations, and that can really strengthen culture and subculture at companies, right?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. I'm thinking back to my team at Asana. Community, because of the nature of the company, was global. We had customers all over the world. And so my team, even pre-pandemic, I had people all over the world, which meant that there was no one time of day or one place that would work for us to anchor the team in. And so my challenge was, how do I build community amongst my own community team when we're not, and likely will never all be in the same place at the same time?
Yeah.
And in the 7 years I was at Asana, there was never a point where we were all in the same place at the same time.
Never in 7 years?
Never in 7 years where all of
Wow.
us were together in one room at the same place at the same time.
Amazing.
But what was interesting is that we leveraged a lot of the tools that frankly are available that weren't available previously to help build connection between our team as a whole and between individuals. That took a lot of, frankly, pretty deliberate planning on my part in order to do that. But what was really interesting to me was during the pandemic, all of us were just squares on the screen. It was like literally even playing field. And all of us had equal voice in meetings. All of us, if I had my team in Europe that I was on a call with, along with my team in the US, all of us were even. It was equal.
Right.
And then when we went back into the office post pandemic, my team in Europe, they were just faces on a screen when my team in the US was sitting there in the meeting room. Automatically, the dynamic shifted. It was no longer an even playing field. And the feedback from my team, even the people who were in the US, was it felt better when we were all on screen as one rather than some were here and some are there. And the inequity became literally in front of us level apparent.
Yeah, it's something that we've been dealing with here as well, where the the nature of how you bring people into the room that's virtual is like there really isn't a technological solution to do it properly when the external folks are distributed. So we've been kind of working with a bunch of our larger customers to say, okay, gather there, gather here, gather there. And if everyone's in their own kind of cluster, then it's a lot more fun, even though it may be weird when it's not presentation time to dial into a particular, cluster to watch them on screen.
It's true.
So we're kind of working on this distributed model of showcasing where each cluster does presentations. And then for social time, it's social time in that cluster. But that's also something to do with this IRL programming, which is social time is really important. And you can't socialize through a screen on this like one-to-one feel on a one-to-many implementation. It doesn't work.
It's hard. I mean, we used tools like GatherRound to help us with that, which was awesome to help us do some of the more friendly level socialization one to one and within a group, but
Okay.
it's still challenging. This is a natural mechanism that we are all using now
Yeah.
to varying degrees. Trying to make it feel more natural is a challenge.
It's a challenge. It's a challenge. And like fundamentally, I think it's this whole thing of like, yeah, you know, a lot of it is to do with the aesthetics of the means of communication.
Yeah,
Um, like increasingly, I find myself not on video calls and just on audio calls only. Turning off the camera because now you're so much more free. Looking at you because we're having a conversation one on one. I'm in a studio; it feels natural. I'm used to the camera, but
sure.
yeah. Otherwise, I would want to move. I'd want to take you with me to the couch and talk to you. I'd want to move to the kitchen and cut some onions. Like so that doesn't feel natural, certainly not for me with FaceTime on my phone.
Mhm.
And I see it with my daughter who's 7. She doesn't want to talk to her grandma in different parts of the house. She's like, "No, I'm done. I don't want to talk to you." And then my mom is like, "What? How could you be like this?" And it's really funny. It's because she just innately is like, "I'll talk to you in person when I see you, and that'll be good enough." Um, Okay, let's talk about this idea of how companies can leverage the strength of uh, content to inform communities, and then maybe if that's a feedback loop, where then they can kind of like use communities to solicit uh, guidelines for what to create to support the community in
Oh,
content.
absolutely. So, I one way to think of community is as a channel, another marketing channel, just like social media would be a channel or paid digital ads would be a channel. Distributing to and via community is another channel. And so, in order to distribute something, you need to have content. And
Right,
so, I am a big proponent of creating both community specific content, where it's things that are designed just for people who are more engaged than the average customer,
right,
and for forked versions of campaign content, educational content, etc. So you don't always have to reinvent the wheel and create something from whole cloth, but knowing that this is a different audience than your broader customer base, by them being part of the community, by definition, they're raising their hand saying they want to be more involved.
hmm
So recognize and reflect that in the content that you give them. So this could be something like, if you're doing, let's use a tech company as an example, like a product launch, you typically have a bunch of content that you create that you're going to be distributing on social and sending via email. Create a slightly different version that you give to community members, and maybe you give it to them a week before the general public is going to see it. So you get them invested and involved in the launch that's coming, and you give them assets that you would encourage them to share on their own social media, but you make it templatized so they can edit it on their own. So this type of content package, it's a really great way to engage the community without having to create a bunch of new stuff. But then there will be other things that you might want to create for the community. Maybe there's a guide that you could create for them on how to talk to their teams about your product, or a guide for them on tips and tricks from other community members on how to use the tool. So this is where you can start creating a more circular motion with community, where you ask them for their input. Maybe you create some content from it, then you give it back to them in a reformatted way that other community members can make use of.
Right.
You can also use community members' ideas when you ask them to contribute to specific user generated content. So, this is a thing that I think a lot of communities like to do. And I think it's a smart thing to do, which is, let's say you have a contest about share your best ideas for using our product, and then we're going to make an ebook out of it, or we're going to make social posts from each person and showcase it on our own social media. It's a way to help raise the profile of your community members. Most people want to feel recognized and be seen as experts. So you can really create a circular motion if you do this well, where sometimes you give them content, sometimes you ask them for content, and you always highlight and celebrate when they've created or shared stuff along with you.
I think those are both excellent approaches, and I think on the second one, I feel like a lot of companies who may not have expertise in crafting their own kind of communications that are not just like SEO targeted crappy blog posts, um, they're a little apprehensive at, in their first steps of this, because on one hand, again, it's about kind of vulnerability of brand to like give it up to the community, say, hey, we don't know what you want, like just tell us and we can work on it, because we know stuff that will help you, but we don't know what you need. And I think the expectation amongst especially newbie marketers is that you have to always know what everyone needs all the time, but
Yeah,
you
it's
it's
so
not
wrong.
realistic.
No, no one, no matter how experienced, knows everything. And assuming that you know what your people want all the time is really a fool's errand. Just ask them. The number of times I give this advice to people is astonishing to me, because I'll talk with community leaders who are like, I'm not sure what my community wants. We've tried like doing this and this and this. And then I'll say, have you asked them what they want? Most of them say no. And
Right.
so it's shortest path between point A and point B is the most direct route. The most direct route with community members when you don't know what they want or what they need is just ask them. They'll tell you. That doesn't mean you have to do every single thing that they say, but it will at least give you some direction of what people want, what they need. You could run a survey and make it as structured as you want to collect the information that will be actionable for you. But honestly, just ask people. It's so much easier.
It's funny, and for anyone in the audience that watches this and is kind of still scratching their head on this topic, I don't know if this works as a validator, but just to prove how willing people are to engage with brands, personal or corporate, um, around this idea of co-creation and access to knowledge. Um, you look at LinkedIn and the catfishing that happens constantly. I don't know if that's the right phrase, where someone's like, we decided to do this and we learned this amazing thing, and here are the first 5 pages of my 100-page ebook. Just reply, add me as a contact, like friend me, and then reply with this word and I'll send it to you. And you see thousands of people responding, and those people may not know who that person is, but they're going to form an alliance with them, connect them. That's the power of the motivation, just to get the content that they want.
100%. And this is part creating really valuable content, or at the very least, really engaging hooks to content. This is like marketing 101. Maybe there's just the sizzle and not the steak. Who
Right.
knows?
Right.
But either way, it's engaging enough to get people to take the next action, which is important.
Yeah.
And then from there, you can build out that network of people in whatever way you as the organizer see fit. But never doubt that people are invested and want content that's relevant for them. But if you don't know what that content is, just ask them.
Hmm. So true. How does this apply to video resources or different kind of like media formats, do you think?
I mean, I think it's all the same. I mean, video is much more challenging to create just in terms of production level and time, etc. But I think when it comes to community, you can ask for video testimonials, you can ask people to create walkthroughs. People often do this already online on places like YouTube all the time. If you have a more curated community, you can help guide some of those people. You can give them resources to help them do it more effectively, or equip them with facts that they may not have behind the scenes of like, oh, actually, here's how this thing works. And you can help promote any video content that they might create. Creating your own video content for them to use is also very, very helpful for them because they may not have those resources themselves.
Yeah, and that's again, that's something that could fit into sales motion type stuff too, or like, product education. If you have B2B software and it's an enterprise client, and you know there's going to be like you've sold 1,000 seats, create something for one person to then replicate it or pass it on.
Absolutely.
Um, it's very interesting, and I think is there anything you want to say about that kind of like this like I don't know how to describe it, but the idea of a kind of like unified approach to revenue and to customer retention and community development, how they all stitch together, sales,
Yeah, I think
marketing.
community is a horizontal motion that sits underneath and alongside every part of the customer's journey. So I think if I were a go-to-market leader, I would think about how can community help with acquisition, awareness, adoption, conversion, retention, and then advocacy, every single point throughout that life cycle. I would sit down and think through with each of those stakeholder functions.
Yeah.
If we have a group of people, how might we be able to interact with them and create value for them at this particular stage? And then what are the outcomes that we might want to get from doing that at this particular stage? I think there's a mistake that happens in most organizations where if community sits just within marketing, the only outcomes they really care about are the marketing specific outcomes like awareness and acquisition. But that's only one part of the entire customer journey. The customer doesn't care about your org chart. They
Right.
really don't.
Right.
They are not interested at all in which team community sits within. They're interested in solving for the problems they have at each stage of that life cycle. And so if I'm a go-to-market leader, I would think about how do I put community and really think about it as like one person's experience. How do I put that one person's experience at the center of this entire journey?
Mhm.
And what can I do from the community perspective to help enable that and create value for the customer throughout that?
How do you think, and maybe there's some examples that are top of mind for you, but how do you think companies are suggesting, as part of that kind of harmonized sales, marketing, and other approach to leveraging the power of community? How do you think companies might be using the fact that they have an active and engaged community and a value for community in their customer acquisition strategy, like letting people know that being a customer means being part of something?
I think smart companies recognize that community is a value add to whatever their product or service is.
Right.
It's a differentiator, it's an amplifier, it's an accelerator. And for community members and potential community members, it helps them get more value out of whatever it is that they're signing up for. The smartest companies are putting that into their marketing, putting that into their sales talk track. When you become a customer, you get access to this community that has X number of members and X amount of conversations and all these resources. And here's the different resources that you get,
Mm.
and include a couple testimonials from existing community members who've gotten a lot of value out of it. So it's like any feature of a product. If you think of community as a product under your umbrella, sell it alongside the rest of the things that you're selling and include it as part of that conversation as one of the things that differentiates your offering from your competitors who may not have the luxury of a community that they're creating for their customers. It means something to customers to know that there's other people that use your product or tool and other people that they can talk to.
There was something you said once on stage about the scale of the content base that you guys had, for Asana, for the user generated content and otherwise content that I guess you guys produced and published for the community in a hub in some sort of community portal, and it was like a gargantuan amount of articles that I recall, and
It
and
was a lot. Yeah.
and a huge number of users that participate as well, right?
Yeah, we had when I was at Asana close to 700,000 people actively participating in our community,
Wow.
accessing resources, sharing ideas, having conversations, in addition to the people that were coming to our events online and offline.
And how did those what were the dovetails that you saw, between the in-person events? Because I assume the bulk of them were, software training and pre-training, like early stage training, and then, the community. So, did they work in that way that you would offer IRL for people that are looking to learn and get familiar with the brand and the product, and then they would have the resources to be handed off to the digital community, or
Exactly. It would work in parallel. So we would have the people like to learn and connect in different ways. There are some people who will only learn if they are sitting with their butt in a chair in a classroom. There's others that are happy to do it online while they have three other windows open.
right?
And still others want to just page through something step by step at their own pace. And so we offered all of these different options for people because there is no one right way.
Mhm.
And the way that they would intersect is it was actually the same content just expressed in these different channels.
Okay.
So it meant for us, we didn't need to create three completely different sets of content. There's the core content that we would use across these different channels. We would often test things out channel by channel and see how they'd land, and then adapt them for each of the other channels that we were using.
Hmm.
And then we would always, if for instance, someone came to a course that we hosted at StartWell, there was a forum thread that those people could go to have further conversations about what they learned. So we tie these different community elements together, the education, the experiential part of being in person, the online component where you can have the conversation. Again, it's just one person at the center of it, one member, their experience. Having all of that tied together makes it easier for them and more effective.
It's so interesting, like, considering customer bases, especially like user base, community members, um, for software that's productivity based, where people want to learn and constantly learn, and then have questions about how to use this and how do I do it this way and how can I have this situation. The power of community is very key, and I think this approach would sound a little bit refreshing and perhaps daunting for people that don't come from, that background, or have a different need for building community. But the idea that you could, take a group of people that may not have met but were together at an event, and then literally like share the list of guests, but do it in a way that they're all together and they can keep the connections alive. And I think that's really interesting because a lot of people, again, when they consider events as part of their marketing budget, and they're thinking of pushing media on people and then following up with the salespeople who then go and data mine those contacts post event, you
Mhm.
miss out on so much value.
Yeah, that's a really old-fashioned way of thinking about things is like, what can these people how do we convert them right away? What information can we extract from them to make that process bigger, better, faster, easier?
Right.
That's just not how people buy things anymore. It's such an old-fashioned way of thinking, and where and when people buy, it's hard to determine, but what we can do is build relationships with them, show them value, and help them learn. And part of that is us making sure that they, from the company perspective, that they understand what it is that we do, the pricing and packaging, the features that they might want or might need or might not.
Yep.
And part of it is us connecting them to other customers or potential customers so they can talk about the problems that they're solving and learn from one another. And, we can do that in a forum. We're not giving out their email addresses. It's like you go there if you want to, you have conversations if you want to. And if you don't, that's okay too. There's other ways for you to learn and engage, but it's building up this whole ecosystem around recognizing how people actually engage with customers or with companies today is very different than in the past when they would just contact sales, have someone have a conversation and make a decision. There's the adage of the rule of seven that it takes seven touch points before someone is ready to make a purchasing decision. It's a misnomer to think that the salesperson is the one that closed the deal
Right.
when maybe before that they saw a billboard, they saw an ad, they read an article on a completely different third party website. They asked some people in their network about the product or service. They came to a community event. Like, which one of those was the one that made them make the decision? Impossible to say because it was all of them together. And so this is a much more modern relationship trust based way of thinking about go to market.
And it's a fascinating thing because I think a lot of companies, especially if they're early stage SaaS, they're talking about scale growth. And scale growth is something that is almost, I think, impossible to do sustainably without a value for community and for enabling, your customers to take a feeling of ownership over their use case of your product or service. If they're just expected to consume it, then it's not something that's going to help them. And we see it a lot in Canada. We see a lot of this like approach to unicorn status fueled by this like lie that firstly, digital marketing works, or I should clarify, paid ads work as
They
like
did. They don't
they
anymore.
don't anymore. They don't anymore. And so you can't access user bases to easily just, it's like you can't raise money to pump into ads alone, and then customer service reps to like handle phone calls.
Yeah.
Um,
I think these techniques did work at one point, and that's why they're still part of the playbook. They just don't work, or they don't work as well as they once did, and they're far more expensive to implement and maintain and run in an ongoing basis than they once did.
right.
There's just too much competition for eyeballs and attention. So everything costs more and is more complicated. I think I think from my experience, the people who work in the more scaled digital go-to-market strategies function more on the pulling levers world, not the relationship building world.
Sure.
And
Sure.
so this notion of it takes time, it takes trust, it takes relationships is really foreign to most traditional, well, traditional in the terms of like tech world marketing
Right.
sense.
Glenn Gary,
Because
Glenn Ross people.
yeah, it's very different than what they're used to. And it takes more time. And so while it costs less money, it takes longer. And in the world of unicorns, time is not usually the currency that they're willing to give up.
Let's talk to some practicals that people who watching this might be inspired to go and build out for their own community solutions. So, is there a tech stack that you would recommend or tools? I know, again, 20 years ago, we were talking about solutions starting being like maybe discussion forums, right?
Yeah, I think it depends on the organization and what you're trying to achieve and what the pillars of your program are. So if you are just creating forums, which that's fine, that is a community method. There are many, many forum tools available that let you do just that. However, I would encourage people to think about there are many ways that your community will want to interact with you, your company, and with each other. I am a bigger proponent of community tools that recognize the comprehensive array of ways that people want to connect.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a new breed of tools that are designed from the ground up to put the member at the center of the experience. And that experience can be across events or forums or resources or getting more education or connecting in conversation with one another. These are the tools that I would recommend at this stage because from a community leader's perspective, every time you add a new tool, if you're doing the point solution path, it's a whole nother set of headaches
Right.
because you have to try to connect the dots between these tools. You have to work with your legal and your security teams to procure them and maintain them. And it's it's a lot. And so the fewer tools you can have, the better. So think about what the breadth of your community program might look like. Then try to find a tool that can cover as much of that as possible. Thank me later. Your life will be a lot easier.
Any particular softwares that are recent that you've seen kind of evolve that are interesting?
I'm a big fan of for like person-based communities, I think Circle is really great.
Okay.
For business, company, or brand-based communities, Gradual is really amazing. These are two tools that are thinking about community from a different perspective. They're targeting different parts of the market,
Mm-hmm.
and the ones that they're targeting, they've adapted their solutions for quite well.
Nice. Lastly, we didn't really talk much about you and what you're doing now, but
Yes. So I'm on sabbatical right now. I'm doing some advising and consulting, which has been really amazing. I've also been writing a book about community-led growth, which will be coming out later this year,
nice.
The Community Code. And in a precursor step to that, I've been doing a lot of writing and content creation of my own around my thoughts, experience, and some interviews that I've done with other community leaders about community and where it sits on Substack, also called The Community Code. Just keep it very simple. That's been really fun. Um, sharing my experiences, what I've learned, my opinions. I have a lot of hot takes on community building, as it turns out. And so I've been talking a little about what I think works and what I think doesn't, and how the community world can evolve to better meet the needs of our changing business landscape.
You've seen a big evolution in this whole space in the last couple decades, so there's a lot to share. I particularly like the Substack's depth, and in each piece that you write, you're spending time doing it, and I think it's exciting to see those posts get shared because everyone has a lot of insights to dig into. It's good.
I appreciate that. I'm really writing it for not so much community builders. There's a lot of content already targeted at folks like me who do what I do.
Right.
It's really designed for people who might be cross-functional partners to community teams, stakeholders internally and externally, leaders of companies who are thinking about whether they should build community and why and what that might look like. Because no one's talking about community to these people.
Hmm.
It's a big, big miss. So if no one's going to do it, I'm going to do it.
Nice.